Who grew up in the Midwest? I bet you did. I grew up in Cincinnati, and Cincinnati has some good things going for it, but it's got at least a couple of bad things going for it. And those things include beaches and mountains. If you want those things, you got to go someplace else besides Cincinnati. And where we used to go is to North Carolina, because it has both of those. It has the Smoky Mountains, it has the Outer Banks, pretty good stuff. First time I went to North Carolina was with my family. I was about that big. We went out to the Outer Banks, and I fell in love for the first time. But that's another story for another day. Another time I went to North Carolina, it was with my roommate Scar and his brother Alan. We got into the old white Econoline with Kentucky plates and headed down to the Outer Banks. I don't believe I fell in love that time, but it was a good trip. And as we finished, we were heading home, and we planned to camp in the Smoky Mountains that night. Now, for those of you that grew up since the internet, I will explain that planning today, when I do a camping trip, I look at the map, I search for campgrounds, I look up the reviews, I make a reservation. Back then, the planning was, well, let's camp in the mountains tonight and figure it out when you get there. So we were proceeding with that plan. We got to the mountains, the day was getting toward the end, and we found ourselves driving through the twisty roads with a mountain on one side and a mountain on the other side, and hardly any place to pull off that road, much less start camping. So we were getting a little concerned, but then we saw a place just big enough for the van off on the right side, so we pulled off. Nothing for us on that side. We looked on the other side. I won't call it a path, because that would put the wrong idea in your mind, but there was a break in the vegetation where people had obviously climbed down the mountain before. So we went down there to see what was there, and we found this beautiful stream with water cascading over the boulders and trees growing all around, and next to the stream was a flat spot with no trees, no rocks, no footprints, and it was big enough for our tent. Let me tell you about the tent. Now, Alan had been in the Boy Scouts, and somehow, all these years later, he was still in possession of an official Boy Scout issued tent. And this was a tent that Genghis Khan would have been perfectly comfortable in. It was big, it was green, it was made out of canvas, and it could have slept, well, a Boy Scout troop and maybe half of a Mongol horde in that tent. Maybe not at the same time. But. So we put that up, and Scar and I were ready to go explore the stream, but Alan, he was in the Boy Scouts. Their motto is be prepared. So he let us know that after you put up the tent, then you proceed with the entrenching maneuver. I didn't know what entrenching was, or the fact that there's a tool for it called an entrenching tool. It looks just like a shovel if you're that big. And he proceeded to build a trench around the tent. I hadn't been in the Boy Scouts and I didn't have a tool, so I sat there on the rock and gave him helpful and humorous suggestions all throughout his work, which it took him a fair bit of time, so I had a lot of suggestions, which he didn't appreciate, but he finished it up just as I started to feel some rocks, some drops come down. And we decided that we would retire to the tent in our sleeping bags, get an early to bed, early to rise so we could get home, and a good time tomorrow. So I went to sleep that night in the tent to hear the pat, pat, pat of little raindrops on the canvas roof. I woke up sometime later and it was no longer pit, pit, pat. It was a slushing, gushing torrent of rain coming down on the roof. And I wondered, how would I get back to sleep in that? And then I realized that maybe sleeping was not in my future because my sleeping bag was wet. And I reached out my hand beside me, and the ground was under the surface of the water. There was 2 or 3 inches of water in that tent. And it was not sitting there, it was flowing through the tent. This tent had no floor, and what we thought was the bank of the stream was actually the stream bed when the water came up. So that's where we found ourselves. in the middle of the night, in the torrential rain. Everybody was up and recognizing that we weren't going to spend the night there. We took the tent down, and what was a 1-ton tent coming down that hill now was wet, and it was a 2-ton tent going back up the hill with 2 of us pulling up and 1 of us pushing from the bottom. We finally got that tent back up to the top, looked at each other and decided we're as wet as we're going to get. We're done camping for tonight. We'll be home tomorrow. And that's what we did. And I will say that after that night, I never teased Alan again about being prepared. And it was a good thing too, because that winter, I found myself over in Indiana on a caving expedition, less than fully prepared, and Alan saved my life. But that's another story for another day. But I think I have time for one more story about going to North Carolina, but this one has a guitar in it. Okay, you all right with that? So in this story, my friend Pete and I headed down from Cincinnati, and we wanted to hike the Appalachian Trail. So we hitchhiked down from Cincinnati. Thank you. Dick's setting that up. I had a hernia surgery last week, and he's going to set that up. Hey, hernia, how are you doing down there? I'm doing good, okay. All right, can you be quiet for about 3 minutes? Yes. Okay. So, Pete and I did the Appalachian Trail for about a week. I didn't fall in love on that part of the trip either. And I got up the next morning, it was not raining this time, and went home. And sometime after I got home, I wrote down everything I could remember about that day. And then I threw away all the parts that didn't rhyme and ended up with this song here. It's called Carolina. I remember Carolina in the early morning glow. I remember my days hitchhiking in the glory of the road. I set out with the break of daylight, with my backpack and my thumb, trying to get to Cincinnati by the time that darkness comes. Take me, Carolina, carry me back home. Take me down the highway, far as you can go. I caught my first ride within 10 minutes. There was a pistol on the sea. Had a breakdown on the mountain. Had to call for help on the CB. Down to Gatlinburg and into K-Town. Country music on the radio. Tennessee troopers just doing their duty. Looked me over and let me go. Take me, Carolina, carry me back home. Take me down the highway, far as you can go. Standing there along the roadside as the drivers pass me by, sometimes honking, sometimes waiting, mostly trying to avoid my eye. Bunch of rednecks with a jar of moonshine dropped me way on down some lonesome road. College girl in a beat-up Beetle had some sympathy and drove me home. I remember Carolina with the sun sinking low. I remember my days hitchhiking in the glory of